Question 1. Operational review demonstrates that a concealed weapons permit holder in Arizona is entering a building that has a sign clearly stating "No firearms allowed." Considering Arizona revised statutes regarding concealed carry, what is the most appropriate course of action for the permit holder? Option A. Assume the CWP overrides the signage and proceed into the building with the concealed firearm. Option B. Respect the posted signage and refrain from entering the building with a concealed firearm. Option C. Enter the building and, if questioned, explain that the CWP grants permission to carry. Option D. Rely on personal judgment about the necessity of carrying a firearm in that specific location, disregarding the sign if deemed unnecessary. Correct answer is B. Respect the posted signage and refrain from entering the building with a concealed firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. The core difficulty lies in understanding the nuances of Arizona revised statutes, Rs, concerning concealed carry, particularly the exceptions and prohibitions that apply even when a permit is held. Misinterpreting these statutes can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges, even for a permit holder. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions taken are in strict compliance with the law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Arizona revised statutes, specifically ARS Title 13, Chapter 31, which governs weapons and firearms. This includes recognizing that a concealed weapons permit, CWP, in Arizona does not grant an unrestricted right to carry a concealed weapon in all locations. Permit holder must be aware of and comply with all posted prohibitions and statutory restrictions, such as those pertaining to schools, courthouses, and secure areas of government buildings. The correct approach is to proactively identify and respect all signage indicating prohibited areas, and to understand the legal definitions of these areas as defined by Arizona law. This demonstrates a commitment to responsible gun ownership and legal compliance, which is the fundamental ethical and legal obligation of any CWP holder. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a CWP automatically overrides any posted signage prohibiting firearms. This is a critical legal failure because Arizona law explicitly allows private property owners and certain public entities to prohibit firearms on their premises, and CWP holders are legally obligated to respect these prohibitions. Failure to do so can result in trespassing charges or other offenses. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on personal interpretation of what constitutes a dangerous or prohibited area, without consulting the specific language of ARS or observing posted signs. This approach is ethically and legally flawed because it substitutes subjective judgment for objective legal requirements. Arizona law provides clear definitions and locations where concealed carry is restricted, and personal interpretation is not a valid defense against a violation. A third incorrect approach is to believe that the CWP exempts the holder from all restrictions, including those in areas where firearms are explicitly forbidden by statute, regardless of signage. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the scope of the permit. The CWP grants the privilege to carry concealed, but it does not grant immunity from laws that restrict firearm possession in specific locations for public safety reasons. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Arizona carrying a concealed weapon with a CWP should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This framework involves 1. Proactive education on all relevant Arizona revised statutes pertaining to firearms and concealed carry. 2. Vigilance in observing and understanding all posted signage regarding firearm prohibitions. 3. Seeking clarification from legal counsel or law enforcement if there is any ambiguity regarding the legality of carrying in a particular location. 4. Prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance of confrontation over the use of a firearm, even when legally permitted to carry. This systematic approach ensures that actions are always within the bounds of the law and contribute to a safer community. Question 2. Quality control measures reveal that a permit holder in Arizona is frequently seen carrying a concealed handgun in various public areas, including outside a local elementary school during school hours and inside a county courthouse. The permit holder asserts that their Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit, CWP, allows them to carry in these locations. Which of the following actions best reflects adherence to Arizona law regarding concealed carry? Option A. The permit holder must cease carrying a concealed handgun in all locations explicitly prohibited by Arizona revised statutes, such as schools and courthouses, regardless of their CWP status. Option B. The permit holder should consult with other CWP holders to gauge common practice regarding carrying in schools and courthouses. Option C. The permit holder can continue carrying a concealed handgun in these locations as long as they do not brandish the weapon and believe they are not posing a threat. Option D. The permit holder can carry a concealed handgun in these locations as long as they are not actively engaged in any illegal activity themselves. The correct answer is A. The permit holder must cease carrying a concealed handgun in all locations explicitly prohibited by Arizona revised statutes, such as schools and courthouses, regardless of their CWP status. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their personal beliefs and perceived rights with the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. The challenge lies in understanding that, while Arizona law generally permits concealed carry, there are specific conditions and locations where it is prohibited, regardless of permit status. Misinterpreting these restrictions can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with all applicable statutes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to meticulously review and adhere to the Arizona revised statutes, A.R.S. concerning prohibited places for carrying firearms, even with a valid concealed weapons permit, CWP. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above personal interpretation or convenience. Specifically, ARS Section 13-3102 outlines numerous locations where carrying a deadly weapon is unlawful, such as schools, courthouses, and correctional facilities, irrespective of a permit. Understanding and respecting these statutory limitations is paramount for responsible firearm ownership and carry. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a CWP grants unrestricted carry privileges in all public spaces within Arizona. This fails to acknowledge the specific statutory prohibitions detailed in ARS Section 13-3102. The ethical and legal failure here is a disregard for the legislative intent to restrict firearm carry in sensitive locations, potentially endangering others. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice or common assumptions about where concealed carry is permitted, without consulting the official Arizona revised statutes. This can lead to significant legal misinterpretations. The regulatory failure is the absence of due diligence in verifying legal requirements, which can result in unintentional violations. A third incorrect approach is to believe that personal discretion or a subjective assessment of risk in a particular location overrides the explicit legal restrictions. This approach is ethically flawed as it prioritizes individual judgment over established public safety laws designed to protect a broader community. The ethical failure is the assumption of a right to disregard codified law based on personal opinion. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Arizona seeking to carry a concealed weapon should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the Arizona revised statutes, particularly ARS Section 13-3102. This involves actively seeking out and studying the most current legal information from official state sources. When in doubt about the legality of carrying in a specific location, the professional decision is to err on the side of caution and refrain from carrying the weapon in that location until legal clarity is obtained. This proactive approach ensures compliance and minimizes risk. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that an Arizona concealed weapons permit holder is preparing for a community event. Which of the following actions best demonstrates a proactive and legally compliant approach to carrying a concealed firearm in Arizona? Option A. Believing that a concealed weapons permit automatically overrides any restrictions on carrying in specific types of establishments, such as government buildings or private businesses that have posted signage. Option B. Relying on general knowledge of firearm laws and assuming that carrying a concealed weapon is permissible in most public spaces as long as it is not brandished. Option C. thoroughly reviewing the Arizona Revised Statutes, specifically ARS, Section 13-3112, to identify prohibited locations and understand the duty to inform a peace officer and planning the route to avoid such locations. Option D, considering the duty to inform a peace officer as only applicable during a traffic stop, and otherwise remaining silent about the presence of a concealed firearm unless directly asked. The correct answer is C, thoroughly reviewing the Arizona Revised Statutes, specifically ARS, Section 13-3112, to identify prohibited locations and understand the duty to inform a peace officer and planning the route to avoid such locations. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. Misinterpreting or disregarding the nuances of Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS, Section 13-3112, particularly concerning prohibited places and the duty to inform, can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of a concealed weapons permit, CWP. The decision-making process must be grounded in a thorough understanding of the law and a commitment to responsible firearm ownership. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and informed approach to understanding and adhering to Arizona's concealed carry laws. This includes thoroughly reviewing the Arizona Revised Statutes pertaining to concealed carry, specifically ARS, Section 13-3112, which outlines prohibited places and the duty to inform law enforcement. It also necessitates understanding the permit holder's responsibilities regarding the secure storage of the firearm when not on one's person, and the specific circumstances under which a permit holder must inform a peace officer of their concealed firearm. This approach ensures compliance with the law, minimizes legal risks, and promotes public safety by demonstrating responsible firearm handling and awareness of legal duties. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on general knowledge or anecdotal information about firearm laws. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to account for the specific and detailed requirements of Arizona law, such as the precise list of prohibited locations, e.g., schools, courthouses, polling places on election day, and the exact wording required when informing a peace officer. Such an approach risks unintentional violations of ARS, Section 13-3112. Another incorrect approach is to assume that possessing a CWP grants unrestricted carrying privileges. This is a critical legal and ethical failure. Arizona law, as detailed in ARS, Section 13-3112, clearly delineates places where carrying a concealed weapon is prohibited, regardless of permit status. Failing to recognize these restrictions demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for public safety and legal boundaries. A third incorrect approach is to believe that the duty to inform a peace officer only applies when one is stopped for traffic violation. While traffic stops are a common scenario, ARS, Section 13-3112, requires a permit holder to inform a peace officer when the officer has a reasonable suspicion that the person is committing, has committed, or is about to commit a public offense, or when the officer is making a traffic stop. Limiting this duty to only traffic violations is a misinterpretation of the statute and a significant legal risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking or holding an Arizona CWP should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and responsible conduct. This framework involves 1. Thoroughly researching and understanding the specific statutes governing concealed carry in Arizona, particularly ARS, Section 13-3112. 2. Regularly reviewing updates to these laws. 3. Practicing situational awareness to identify prohibited locations. 4. Mentally preparing for interactions with law enforcement by understanding the duty to inform. 5. Prioritizing safety and adherence to the law above all else. This systematic approach ensures that actions are always aligned with legal requirements and ethical responsibilities. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that individuals seeking to maintain their privilege to carry a concealed weapon in Arizona must be diligent in managing their permit status. Considering the legal framework governing concealed weapons permits, CWP in Arizona, Which of the following actions best demonstrates responsible and legally compliant behavior regarding permit renewal? Option A. Relying on the assumption that a previously issued CWP remains valid indefinitely, without verifying its current status or expiration. Option B. Waiting until the CWP has expired and then immediately beginning the renewal process, assuming it will be reissued without any lapse in legal carrying privileges. Option C. Continuing to carry a concealed weapon after the CWP expiration date, with the intention of renewing it as soon as possible. Option D. Proactively tracking the CWP expiration date and initiating the renewal process well in advance of its lapse, ensuring all required steps are completed before the expiration. The correct answer is D. Proactively tracking the CWP expiration date and initiating the renewal process well in advance of its lapse, ensuring all required steps are completed before the expiration. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. Misinterpreting or disregarding the specific requirements for maintaining a concealed weapons permit, CWP, can lead to serious legal consequences, including permit revocation and criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS. Section 13-3112, which governs concealed carry. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively understanding and adhering to the renewal requirements for an Arizona CWP. This means being aware of the expiration date and initiating the renewal process well in advance, ensuring all necessary steps, such as completing any required training or submitting updated documentation, are fulfilled before the permit lapses. This proactive stance is correct because ARS. Section 13-3112 mandates that a permit holder must maintain their eligibility and follow renewal procedures to legally continue carrying a concealed weapon. Failing to renew on time means the permit is no longer valid, and carrying a concealed weapon without a valid permit is a violation of Arizona law. Incorrect approach is analysis. Allowing a permit to expire and then attempting to carry a concealed weapon by claiming ignorance of the renewal deadline is a regulatory failure. Arizona law does not provide a grace period for expired permits. Once expired, the privilege to carry concealed is lost until a valid permit is reissued. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence in maintaining legal compliance. Assuming that previously issued CWP remains valid indefinitely without checking its expiration date or renewal status is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. The law requires active maintenance of permit validity, and an expired permit offers no legal protection. This approach shows a disregard for the legal framework governing concealed carry. Believing that the renewal process can be completed immediately after the permit has expired, without considering the potential processing times or the legal implications of carrying during the interim period, is also a flawed approach. Carrying a concealed weapon without a valid permit, even if the renewal process has been initiated, is illegal in Arizona. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of when legal carrying is permissible. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Arizona who hold or wish to obtain a concealed weapons permit should adopt a system of proactive compliance. This involves calendaring permit expiration dates, understanding the specific renewal requirements outlined by the Arizona Department of Public Safety, and initiating the renewal process at least 60-90 days prior to expiration. Regular review of relevant statutes and departmental advisories is also crucial to stay informed of any changes in regulations. This systematic approach ensures continuous legal compliance and avoids the pitfalls of expired permits and potential legal repercussions. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals that the Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit, CWP, renewal process is experiencing significant delays. To optimize this process while strictly adhering to Arizona Revised Statutes, which of the following strategies would best ensure timely renewals and continued public safety? Option A. Require all applicants to resubmit their complete original application package, including fingerprints and references, for every CWP renewal. Option B. Proactively cross-reference applicant renewal information with current state and federal databases to identify and resolve potential disqualifying factors or discrepancies before they cause delays. Option C. Expedite all CWP renewals upon submission, assuming applicants remain qualified, and conduct background checks only if specific concerns are raised later. Option D. Implement a policy to process renewals only after an applicant's current permit has expired, to manage the existing backlog more effectively. The correct answer is B. Proactively cross-reference applicant renewal information with current state and federal databases to identify and resolve potential disqualifying factors or discrepancies before they cause delays. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to streamline the process of renewing a concealed weapons permit, CWP, in Arizona. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the state's interest in public safety and responsible firearm ownership with the applicant's right to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Misinterpreting or misapplying Arizona revised statutes, Rs, concerning CWP renewals can lead to either undue burden on law-abiding citizens or potential security risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with ARS Section 13-3112, which governs CWP renewals, while also promoting an efficient and accessible process. The most effective approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential delays in the renewal process by cross-referencing applicant information with relevant state and federal databases. This method ensures that all statutory requirements, including background checks, are met without unnecessary administrative hurdles. By anticipating common issues, such as outdated contact information or minor discrepancies in records, and having predefined protocols to resolve them, the renewal process can be significantly expedited. This aligns with the spirit of ARS Section 13-3112, which mandates timely renewal processing and upholds the principle of responsible firearm ownership by ensuring that all permit holders continue to meet the necessary qualifications. An approach that prioritizes immediate renewal upon submission without verifying updated background check information is procedurally flawed. While seemingly efficient, it bypasses a critical component of the renewal process mandated by ARS Section 13-3112, which requires a review to ensure the applicant still meets the criteria for carrying a concealed weapon. This could lead to individuals who have become disqualified since their last permit was issued continuing to hold a valid CWP, posing a risk to public safety. Another ineffective strategy is to require applicants to resubmit all original application documentation for every renewal. This is not only inefficient, but also exceeds the requirements outlined in ARS Section 13-3112, which focuses on verifying current eligibility rather than re-establishing it from scratch. Such a process creates an unnecessary burden on applicants and administrative resources, hindering the goal of efficient permit management. Finally, delaying renewal processing until the permit has already expired, citing a backlog of applications, is a direct violation of the statutory intent. ARS Section 13-3112 implies a continuous validity of the permit, and allowing it to lapse due to administrative delays undermines the purpose of the renewal system and creates a period where an individual may be legally carrying a concealed weapon without a current, valid permit. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the specific statutory requirements of ARS Section 13-3112, identifying potential bottlenecks in the current process, and developing proactive solutions that ensure both compliance and efficiency. This involves continuous review of operational procedures against legal mandates and applicant feedback to foster a system that is both secure and user-friendly. Question 6. Cost-benefit analysis shows that maintaining a current Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit, CWP, and understanding the nuances of Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-3102 regarding prohibited places and lawful use of force is paramount. Considering this, which of the following actions best reflects responsible and legally compliant concealed carry in Arizona? Option A. Drawing the firearm in situations where a perceived threat exists, even if the threat is not immediate or clearly defined under Arizona law. Option B. Carrying the firearm in a manner that is easily visible to others to deter potential threats, even if the permit is valid. Option C. Relying on the initial CWP issuance date as an indicator of ongoing validity without checking for renewals or legal amendments. Option D. Regularly verifying the validity of the CWP, ensuring the firearm is carried discreetly, and prioritizing de-escalation in potentially confrontational situations. The correct answer is D. Regularly verifying the validity of the CWP, ensuring the firearm is carried discreetly, and prioritizing de-escalation in potentially confrontational situations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance personal safety concerns with the legal requirements and ethical responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. The decision-making process is complicated by the potential for misinterpretation of laws, the subjective nature of perceived threats, and the critical importance of responsible firearm ownership. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Arizona Revised Statutes, A.R.S. Section 13-3102, which governs concealed carry, while also upholding the duty to act responsibly and avoid unnecessary escalation of situations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Arizona's concealed carry laws, including the specific requirements for obtaining and maintaining a permit. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm handling. Specifically, it means ensuring the permit is current, the firearm is carried in compliance with all statutory restrictions, e.g., not in prohibited places like schools or federal buildings unless explicitly permitted, and that the individual is prepared to de-escalate situations rather than resort to force. This aligns with the spirit of A.R.S. Section 13-3102, which permits concealed carry under specific conditions and emphasizes responsible conduct. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that simply possessing a permit is sufficient, without actively verifying its current validity or understanding any recent changes in state law that might affect carry privileges. This overlooks the legal obligation to maintain a valid permit and stay informed about regulations, potentially leading to an unlawful act. Another incorrect approach is to carry a firearm in a manner that is overly conspicuous or to brandish it unnecessarily, even if legally permitted to carry concealed. This demonstrates a lack of judgment and can create fear or provoke unintended confrontations, violating the ethical expectation of responsible and discreet firearm carriage. Finally, an approach that relies on subjective interpretations of personal threat levels without a clear and imminent danger, leading to the firearm being drawn or used in a situation not legally justified under Arizona law, is a severe ethical and legal failure. This disregards the legal standards for the use of deadly force and the principles of responsible self-defense. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive review of all applicable Arizona Revised Statutes related to concealed carry and the use of force. This should be followed by a continuous commitment to education and awareness of any legislative updates. When faced with a potentially threatening situation, the primary objective should be de-escalation and avoidance of conflict. If carrying a concealed weapon, the individual must constantly assess their actions against the legal requirements and ethical standards of responsible firearm ownership, prioritizing safety, legality, and discretion above all else. Question 7. Implementation of Arizona Revised Statutes regarding concealed carry requires a permit holder to exercise careful judgment when entering establishments. If an individual with a valid Arizona concealed weapons permit is walking towards a business that clearly advertises and serves alcoholic beverages for on-site consumption, what is the legally compliant and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Leave the concealed weapon secured in the vehicle parked directly outside the establishment, as it is not on the person. Option B. Do not enter the establishment with the concealed weapon, as Arizona law prohibits carrying a concealed deadly weapon in a place of business that sells alcohol for consumption on the premises. Option C. Enter the establishment with the concealed weapon, assuming that as long as the primary business is not solely a bar, the law does not apply. Option D. Enter the establishment with the concealed weapon, but remain discreet and avoid drawing attention to its presence. Correct answer is B. Do not enter the establishment with the concealed weapon, as Arizona law prohibits carrying a concealed deadly weapon in a place of business that sells alcohol for consumption on the premises. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. Challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Arizona Revised Statutes, Rs, concerning concealed carry, particularly the exceptions and prohibitions, and applying them to a dynamic, real-world situation. Misinterpreting these statutes can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of a concealed weapons permit, CWP. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the law while maintaining personal safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Arizona Revised Statutes, specifically ARS Section 13-3102, which outlines the prohibitions on carrying a deadly weapon. This statute clearly states that a person shall not carry a deadly weapon concealed on their person or in any vehicle if they are within a place of business that sells alcohol for consumption on the premises. Therefore, recognizing the establishment as a bar and understanding that it falls under this prohibition is the correct and legally mandated response. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety over personal convenience or a perceived need for immediate self-defense in a prohibited location. Incorrect approach is analysis. Carrying the concealed weapon into the establishment, despite knowing it sells alcohol for on-site consumption, directly violates ARS Section 13-3102. This action demonstrates a failure to understand or a deliberate disregard for the law, leading to potential criminal charges and CWP revocation. It prioritizes personal choice over legal mandates. Leaving the concealed weapon in the vehicle parked outside the establishment, while seemingly a compromise, is still problematic. ARS Section 13-3102 also prohibits carrying a deadly weapon concealed in any vehicle if the vehicle is within a place of business that sells alcohol for consumption on the premises. This means the weapon, even if secured in the vehicle, is still in a prohibited location relative to the establishment. This approach fails to fully address the legal restrictions. Assuming the establishment is not primarily a place that sells alcohol for consumption on the premises, without verifying its classification under Arizona law, is a dangerous assumption. The statute is clear about places of business that sells alcohol for consumption on the premises. If the establishment fits this description, regardless of other services offered, the prohibition applies. This approach relies on subjective interpretation rather than objective legal compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona must adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves regularly reviewing and understanding the relevant statutes, particularly ARS Section 13-3102, and staying updated on any legislative changes. Before entering any establishment, especially those where alcohol is served, individuals should exercise due diligence to determine if their intended location falls under any statutory prohibitions. If there is any doubt, the safest and most legally sound decision is to refrain from carrying the concealed weapon into that location, or to make alternative arrangements for its secure storage in a legally permissible manner. This decision-making framework emphasizes knowledge, caution, and unwavering adherence to the law. Question 8. To address the challenge of ensuring lawful concealed weapon carriage in Arizona, an applicant for a concealed weapons permit, CWP, must demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of where firearms are permitted and prohibited. Considering Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-3102, which of the following best reflects the applicant's required knowledge regarding carrying a concealed firearm in public spaces? Option A. A permit holder can carry a concealed firearm anywhere they feel it is necessary for self-defense, provided they do not brandish the weapon, as the primary purpose of the permit is personal protection. Option B. The permit grants the right to carry a concealed firearm in all locations within Arizona, with the exception of federal buildings, as the state law supersedes all other restrictions. Option C. A concealed weapon permit allows the holder to carry a firearm in any public building or establishment, as long as no explicit "No Guns Allowed" sign is visible. Option D. A permit holder may carry a concealed firearm in most public places, but must be aware of and adhere to specific statutory prohibitions, such as those concerning courthouses, correctional facilities, and polling places on Election Day, and must also respect posted notices on private property. The correct answer is D. A permit holder may carry a concealed firearm in most public places, but must be aware of and adhere to specific statutory prohibitions, such as those concerning courthouses, correctional facilities, and polling places on Election Day, and must also respect posted notices on private property. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of the nuanced legal requirements for carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying and the conditions under which such carrying is restricted. Misinterpreting these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the denial of a permit. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between lawful and unlawful concealed carry. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly understanding and adhering to Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS. Section 13-3102, which outlines the conditions and locations where a person with a valid concealed weapon permit may carry a firearm. This includes recognizing that while a permit generally allows concealed carry, there are specific prohibitions, such as in courthouses, correctional facilities, and polling places on Election Day. The correct approach emphasizes knowledge of these explicit statutory restrictions and the importance of verifying signage at any location. This aligns with the legal framework designed to balance the right to self-defense with public safety concerns. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a concealed weapon permit grants unrestricted carrying privileges in all public places. This fails to acknowledge the specific statutory limitations outlined in ARS. Section 13-3102, such as prohibitions in courthouses or polling places, and can lead to unlawful carrying. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the absence of explicit, no guns allowed signage as permission to carry. Arizona law often imposes restrictions based on the nature of the establishment or event, regardless of signage. For example, carrying in a courthouse is prohibited by statute, irrespective of whether a sign is posted. A third incorrect approach is to believe that a concealed weapon permit automatically overrides any private property owner's right to prohibit firearms on their premises. While a permit holder may carry in many locations, private property owners can generally post notice prohibiting firearms, and a permit holder must respect such prohibitions. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking or holding a concealed weapon permit in Arizona should adopt a proactive and diligent approach to understanding the law. This involves not only studying the statutes, but also being aware of signage and respecting private property rights. A decision-making framework should prioritize legal compliance above all else, seeking clarification from official sources, like the Arizona Department of Public Safety, when in doubt about specific locations or circumstances. The focus should always be on lawful conduct to avoid legal repercussions and maintain public trust. Question 9. The review process indicates that an Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit (CWP) application has been submitted, and while the initial background check appears clear, there is a desire to expedite the final approval to demonstrate efficiency. What is the most appropriate course of action for the issuing authority? Option A. Place the application on hold indefinitely, citing a need for further unspecified review to allow for a more comprehensive, albeit unlegislated, investigation. Option B. Approve the permit without completing all required background checks, assuming the applicant is unlikely to pose a threat based on their demeanor during the application process. Option C. Issue the permit immediately upon receiving a seemingly clear initial background check to showcase administrative speed and responsiveness to the applicant. Option D. Proceed with the final approval only after the full statutory review period has elapsed and all mandated background checks have been completed and documented, ensuring compliance with Arizona Revised Statutes. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the final approval only after the full statutory review period has elapsed and all mandated background checks have been completed and documented, ensuring compliance with Arizona Revised Statutes. Explanation. The review process indicates that processing a Concealed Weapons Permit (CWP) application in Arizona requires strict adherence to statutory timelines and procedural fairness. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the applicant's right to a timely decision with the state's obligation to ensure public safety through thorough vetting. Mismanaging this process can lead to legal challenges, reputational damage for the issuing agency, and potentially compromise public safety if a permit is issued prematurely or unfairly denied. The correct approach involves diligently following the established statutory review period for CWP applications in Arizona, as outlined in Arizona Revised Statutes, A.R.S. Section 13-3112. This statute mandates specific timeframes for background checks and the issuance or denial of a permit. A thorough review conducted within these legal parameters ensures that all necessary checks are completed without undue delay, thereby upholding both the applicant's rights and public safety. This approach is legally sound and ethically responsible, demonstrating a commitment to due process and statutory compliance. An incorrect approach would be to prematurely approve an application based on a cursory review, without completing all mandated background checks. This bypasses critical public safety protocols and violates the spirit and letter of A.R.S. Section 13-3112, which is designed to prevent individuals who pose a risk from obtaining a CWP. Another incorrect approach is to intentionally delay the review process beyond the statutory limits without a legally justifiable reason, such as a pending criminal investigation. This infringes upon the applicant's right to a timely decision and can be subject to legal action. Finally, denying an application without documented, legally sufficient grounds, as required by statute, is also an unacceptable and unethical practice that undermines the integrity of the CWP system. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes statutory compliance, thoroughness, and fairness. This involves understanding the specific timelines and requirements of A.R.S. Section 13-3112, maintaining detailed records of all review steps, and seeking clarification or additional time only when legally permissible and documented. A commitment to procedural justice and public safety should guide every decision. Question 10. Examination of the data shows that a business in Arizona is concerned about potential liability arising from an incident involving a concealed weapon permit holder on their premises. If a patron were to sustain a severe injury due to the negligence of a concealed weapon permit holder, and the potential compensatory damages are estimated to be $500,000, what is the maximum potential financial exposure for the business in Arizona, assuming the incident falls under A.R.S. Section 12-751, which caps non-economic damages at $450,000 for claims arising after August 12, 1987, and that the $500,000 estimate includes $400,000 in economic damages and $100,000 in non-economic damages. Option A, $850,000. Option B, $400,000. Option C, $450,000. Option D, $500,000. The correct answer is A, $850,000. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the need to accurately calculate the potential financial impact of a concealed weapon permit holder's actions, which can have significant legal and financial ramifications for a business. Careful judgment is required to ensure the calculations are precise and reflect the actual potential losses, thereby informing appropriate risk mitigation strategies. The best approach involves a direct calculation of the maximum potential liability based on the statutory limits for damages in Arizona for the specific tort alleged. This method is correct because Arizona law, specifically A.R.S. Section 12-751, outlines the caps on damages for certain claims, including those that might arise from an incident involving a concealed weapon permit holder on business premises. By applying these statutory caps, the calculation provides a legally sound and defensible estimate of the maximum potential financial exposure. This adheres to the principle of basing financial risk assessments on established legal frameworks. An incorrect approach would be to estimate potential damages based on anecdotal evidence or industry averages without considering the specific legal limitations in Arizona. This fails to acknowledge the statutory caps on damages, leading to an inflated or inaccurate assessment of risk. Such an approach lacks regulatory grounding and could result in misallocation of resources for risk management. Another incorrect approach is to simply ignore the possibility of damages altogether, assuming that a permit holder is inherently less likely to cause harm. This is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. Arizona law does not exempt permit holders from liability, and businesses have a duty of care to their patrons and employees, regardless of an individual's permit status. Failing to account for potential damages based on such assumptions is negligent and exposes the business to significant unforeseen liability. A third incorrect approach involves calculating potential damages based on the average cost of a lawsuit without considering the specific nature of the potential claim or the statutory damage caps. While legal costs are a factor, the primary financial risk in such a scenario stems from the potential judgment awarded, not solely the procedural costs. This method overlooks the core financial exposure defined by Arizona law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the specific legal and regulatory landscape of Arizona. This involves identifying potential liabilities, researching relevant statutes, such as those pertaining to tort damages and premises liability, and performing calculations based on these legal parameters. When faced with uncertainty, it is prudent to err on the side of caution and base calculations on the maximum legally permissible damages, ensuring a robust risk assessment. Question 11. Upon reviewing the Arizona revised statutes regarding concealed carry, an individual holding a valid Arizona concealed weapons permit, CWP, is planning a visit to a public library. Considering the legal framework governing CWP holders in Arizona, what is the most appropriate course of action regarding carrying a concealed firearm? Option A. Carry the concealed firearm into the public library. Believing that personal safety concerns override specific location restrictions for permit holders. Option B. Carry the concealed firearm into the public library, assuming that since it is not a school or courthouse, it is permissible. Option C. Carry the concealed firearm into the public library, as the CWP generally permits concealed carry in most public places. Option D. Refrain from carrying the concealed firearm into the public library due to specific statutory prohibitions. The correct answer is C. Carry the concealed firearm into the public library, as the CWP generally permits concealed carry in most public places. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the intersection of personal rights, public safety, and legal obligations under Arizona law concerning concealed carry. The challenge lies in understanding the nuances of when and where a concealed weapon permit holder may lawfully carry a firearm, and the critical importance of adhering to specific prohibitions to avoid legal repercussions and ensure public safety. Misinterpreting these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences, including permit revocation and criminal charges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Arizona revised statutes, ARS. Section 13-3102, which outlines the permissible locations for carrying a concealed weapon by a permit holder. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law by recognizing that, while a permit generally allows concealed carry, specific locations are expressly prohibited. Therefore, a permit holder must actively inform themselves of these restrictions and avoid carrying in prohibited areas, such as schools, courthouses, and polling places on Election Day, unless explicitly permitted by law. This proactive compliance ensures legal standing and contributes to public safety by respecting designated no-carry zones. Incorrect approaches analysis. Carrying a concealed weapon into a public library, even with a valid Arizona concealed weapons permit, is a regulatory failure. Arizona law, specifically ARS Section 13-3102, p. 1, prohibits carrying a deadly weapon or firearm in a public library. This prohibition is in place to ensure the safety of patrons and staff in a public space where individuals of all ages gather. Another incorrect approach is assuming that a permit grants unrestricted carry in all public spaces. For instance, carrying a concealed weapon into a courthouse, even if not actively in session, is also prohibited under ARS. Section 13-3102 p. 3, as courthouses are designated secure areas. Finally, believing that a permit holder can carry a concealed weapon into a polling place on Election Day is a direct violation of ARS. Section 13-3102 p. 4, which specifically prohibits firearms in polling places during elections. These failures stem from a lack of specific knowledge regarding the statutory prohibitions outlined in Arizona law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Arizona seeking to carry a concealed weapon must adopt a mindset of continuous learning and strict adherence to the law. The decision-making process should begin with obtaining a valid permit and then dedicating time to thoroughly study ARS. Section 13-3102, paying close attention to the explicit prohibitions. When in doubt about the legality of carrying in a particular location, the professional should err on the side of caution and refrain from carrying the weapon until the legality can be definitively confirmed through official legal resources or consultation with legal counsel. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above personal convenience or assumption. Question 12. When evaluating a situation in Arizona where an individual is carrying a concealed weapon and perceives a potential threat, what is the most critical initial step to ensure legal compliance and responsible action? Option A. Confirming the legality of carrying a concealed weapon in the specific location where the individual is present, in addition to assessing the immediate threat. Option B. Immediately drawing the concealed weapon to deter any potential aggressor, assuming the permit covers all situations. Option C. Relying on personal judgment of the situation to determine if the threat warrants defensive action, without specific regard to location restrictions. Option D. Prioritizing the use of verbal de-escalation tactics over any consideration of the weapon, regardless of the severity of the perceived threat. The correct answer is A. Confirming the legality of carrying a concealed weapon in the specific location where the individual is present, in addition to assessing the immediate threat. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Arizona revised statutes, ARS, concerning the permissible use of deadly force and the specific locations where a concealed weapon permit holder may lawfully carry. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges, even if the individual believes they are acting within their rights. Careful judgment is required to assess the immediate threat and the legality of the location before any action is taken. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Arizona revised statutes, specifically ARS Section 13-404, Justification of Use of Force, and ARS Section 13-3102, Carrying a concealed weapon. This approach prioritizes assessing the immediate threat to life or serious bodily harm and confirming that the location where the individual is present is not a prohibited place for carrying a concealed weapon as defined by Arizona law. For instance, ARS Section 13-3102b lists specific locations such as schools, courthouses, and polling places where carrying a concealed weapon is prohibited, regardless of a permit. Therefore, before considering the use of a weapon, the individual must first ascertain the legality of their presence with a concealed weapon in that specific environment. This aligns with the legal framework that permits concealed carry and the use of force only under specific, legally defined circumstances and in legally permissible locations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that simply possessing a valid Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit, CWP, grants the right to carry a concealed weapon in all locations and under all circumstances. This fails to acknowledge the explicit prohibitions outlined in ARS Section 13-3102b, which restrict carrying in certain sensitive areas. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize immediate defensive action based solely on a perceived threat, without first verifying the legality of carrying a concealed weapon in that particular location. This overlooks the foundational requirement that the act of carrying itself must be lawful before any justification for the use of force can be considered. A third incorrect approach is to rely on personal interpretations of self-defense laws without consulting the specific statutes, such as ARS Section 13-404, which clearly defines the conditions under which deadly force is justified. This can lead to an overestimation of one's rights and a misapplication of the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Arizona carrying a concealed weapon should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of ARS Title 13, Chapter 4, Justification of Justifiable Force, and ARS Title 13, Chapter 31, Weapons. This framework dictates a sequential assessment. First, confirm the legality of carrying a concealed weapon in the current location. Second, assess the presence of an immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm. And third, if both conditions are met, evaluate the proportionality and necessity of using deadly force as defined by ARS Section 13-404. This structured approach ensures that actions are not only reactive to a threat, but also compliant with all relevant Arizona statutes. Question 13. The analysis reveals that an Arizona resident holding a valid concealed weapons permit (CWP) is attending a community event held at a public park. The park has a sign at its entrance stating, "No firearms allowed." Considering Arizona revised statutes, what is the most legally sound and professionally responsible course of action for the CWP holder? Option A. Carry the concealed weapon but keep it discreetly concealed and avoid any interaction that might draw attention to its presence. Option B. Consult with other attendees who are also CWP holders to gauge their understanding and decide based on a consensus. Option C. Assume the signage is a general recommendation and proceed to carry the concealed weapon, as the CWP supersedes such signs in public parks. Option D. Respect the posted signage and refrain from carrying a concealed weapon within the park grounds. The correct answer is D. Respect the posted signage and refrain from carrying a concealed weapon within the park grounds. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the intersection of personal rights and public safety responsibilities, specifically concerning the carrying of a concealed weapon in Arizona. The challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Arizona revised statutes, (ARS), related to concealed carry, particularly the exceptions and prohibitions, and applying them to a situation where a permit holder might be in a location with specific restrictions. Misinterpreting these statutes can lead to legal consequences and compromise public safety. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the law while exercising a constitutionally protected right. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Arizona revised statutes, specifically ARS Section 13-3102, which outlines the locations where carrying a concealed weapon is prohibited, even for permit holders. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety by recognizing that a concealed weapons permit does not grant unrestricted carry privileges in all locations. It requires the individual to proactively identify and respect posted prohibitions and statutory restrictions, such as those concerning schools, courthouses, and polling places on Election Day. This is correct because it directly aligns with the legal framework established by Arizona law to balance the right to carry with the need for safety in sensitive areas. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid Arizona concealed weapons permit, CWP, allows carrying a concealed weapon in any location within Arizona, regardless of posted signs or statutory prohibitions. This fails to acknowledge that ARS Section 13-3102 explicitly lists several locations where carrying a concealed weapon is prohibited, even for permit holders. This approach is a direct violation of Arizona law and demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding the scope of the permit. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on personal interpretation of what constitutes a sensitive location without consulting the specific statutes. While common sense might suggest certain places are sensitive, Arizona law provides a definitive list. This approach risks overstepping legal boundaries because it substitutes personal judgment for established legal requirements, potentially leading to an unlawful act. A further incorrect approach is to believe that if a location is not explicitly mentioned in the permit holder's training materials, it is permissible to carry a concealed weapon there. Permit holder training provides a foundation, but it is not a substitute for understanding the full scope of Arizona revised statutes governing concealed carry. This approach is flawed because it limits knowledge to training rather than the comprehensive legal requirements, which can change and are detailed in the statutes themselves. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Arizona who hold a concealed weapons permit must adopt a proactive and legally informed approach. This involves regularly reviewing Arizona revised statutes related to firearm carry, particularly ARS Section 13-3102. Stay updated on all prohibitions and restrictions. Before entering any location, especially those that might be considered sensitive or have posted signage, a permit holder should make a conscious effort to determine if carrying a concealed weapon is legally permissible. This decision-making process should prioritize legal compliance above all else, ensuring that the exercise of the right to carry does not infringe upon public safety or violate state law. Question 14. Comparative studies suggest that individuals with concealed weapons permits in Arizona often face challenging situations when determining the legality of carrying a firearm in various public establishments. Considering the specific provisions of Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-3102, which of the following actions demonstrates the most responsible and legally compliant approach when encountering an establishment with a sign that is partially obscured and difficult to read, but appears to indicate a prohibition on firearms? Option A. Discreetly store the firearm in a secure location within the vehicle and refrain from entering the establishment or seek an alternative location for the activity. Option B. Carry the firearm openly, believing that this action will negate any prohibition indicated by the obscured sign. Option C. Ask a fellow patron or an employee if firearms are permitted and proceed based on their verbal response. Option D. Proceed into the establishment, assuming the sign is not legally binding due to its poor condition and the permit holder's right to carry. The correct answer is A. Discreetly store the firearm in a secure location within the vehicle and refrain from entering the establishment, or seek an alternative location for the activity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a concealed weapon permit holder in Arizona by requiring them to navigate the complex interplay between personal rights, public safety, and the specific legal restrictions governing the carrying of firearms in sensitive locations. The core difficulty lies in accurately interpreting and applying Arizona Revised Statutes, Rs, concerning prohibited places, especially when faced with ambiguous signage or situations where the presence of a firearm might be perceived differently by various individuals. Careful judgment is required to avoid unintentional violations of the law, which can have severe legal and personal consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and conservative approach to firearm carriage in public spaces. This means thoroughly understanding the specific prohibitions outlined in ARS Section 13-3102, which details locations where carrying a concealed weapon is illegal, such as schools, courthouses, and polling places, and places where notice is given. When encountering a location with ambiguous signage or a situation where the presence of a firearm might be contentious, the most prudent action is to err on the side of caution. This involves discreetly storing the firearm in a secure manner within the vehicle or choosing not to enter the establishment if there is any doubt about the legality or appropriateness of carrying. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and minimizes the risk of confrontation or accidental violation by strictly adhering to the letter and spirit of Arizona law, which emphasizes responsible firearm ownership and public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that any establishment not explicitly listed in ARS Section 13-3102 is permissible for carrying a concealed weapon, regardless of any posted signage. This fails to acknowledge the statute's provision regarding places where notice is given, meaning a property owner or entity can prohibit firearms through clear signage. Another incorrect approach is to rely on the interpretation of others, such as fellow patrons or employees, regarding the legality of carrying a firearm in a specific location. This abdicates personal responsibility for legal compliance and can lead to misinterpretations of the law. Finally, an incorrect approach involves carrying a firearm into a location with a clear "No Firearms" sign, believing that the sign is merely a suggestion or that the permit holder's right to carry supersedes the property owner's right to restrict firearms. This directly violates the statutory prohibition and demonstrates a disregard for both the law and property rights. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of ARS Section 13-3102. For entering any establishment, they should actively look for signage indicating firearm restrictions. If signage is present, they must adhere to it. In the absence of clear signage, they should consider the nature of the establishment and whether it falls under any of the explicitly prohibited categories. When in doubt, the principle of "when in doubt, leave it out" or "secure it in the vehicle" should be applied. This proactive and conservative approach ensures legal compliance, promotes public safety, and upholds the responsible image of firearm permit holders. Question 15. The investigation demonstrates a situation where an Arizona concealed weapon permit holder, while in a public park, felt increasingly uncomfortable due to another individual's persistent and aggressive questioning about their personal life. The permit holder, feeling cornered and anxious, subtly reached for their concealed firearm under their jacket. What is the most appropriate course of action for the permit holder in this scenario? Adhering to Arizona law and responsible firearm practices. Option A. Maintain situational awareness, continue to de-escalate the verbal interaction, and avoid any overt actions that could be perceived as threatening, only considering the firearm if there is an immediate and overt threat of physical harm. Option B. Discreetly reveal the presence of the concealed firearm by adjusting their jacket to make the outline more visible, signaling to the other individual that they are armed and capable of self-defense. Option C. Immediately draw the firearm and display it to the individual to create distance and end the uncomfortable interaction. Option D. Directly confront the individual, verbally assert their right to not be questioned, and subtly place their hand on their concealed firearm to deter further harassment. The correct answer is A. Maintain situational awareness, continue to de-escalate the verbal interaction, and avoid any overt actions that could be perceived as threatening, only considering the firearm if there is an immediate and overt threat of physical harm. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a permit holder's actions could be misconstrued, highlighting the critical importance of understanding the nuances of Arizona's concealed carry laws and the ethical responsibilities that accompany carrying a firearm. The challenge lies in balancing the right to self-defense with the obligation to act responsibly and avoid actions that could be perceived as threatening or escalatory, even if unintentional. Misinterpreting the scope of permissible conduct under Arizona Revised Statutes, A.R.S. Section 13-3112, can lead to unintended legal consequences and erode public trust. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of Arizona law regarding the carrying of concealed handguns and the specific circumstances under which a permit holder may be justified in displaying their weapon. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and adherence to legal boundaries. Specifically, ARS Section 13-3112 outlines the requirements for obtaining and maintaining a concealed weapon permit, and generally permits the carrying of a concealed handgun. However, it does not grant a permit holder the right to brandish or display a weapon in a manner that could be construed as threatening or intimidating, without a clear and present danger justifying such action. The best professional practice is to avoid any action that could be perceived as aggressive or provocative, focusing instead on maintaining situational awareness, and only resorting to the display of a firearm as a last resort in a situation where there is an immediate threat of death or serious physical injury, as per self-defense principles recognized under Arizona law. An incorrect approach would be to assume that having a concealed weapon permit grants broad authority to display the weapon in situations that do not meet the strict legal threshold for self-defense. For instance, displaying a firearm merely to assert authority or intimidate someone in a non-threatening dispute violates the spirit and letter of Arizona's concealed carry laws. Such an action could be interpreted as brandishing a weapon, which is a separate offense under ARS Section 13-3102, regardless of permit status, and could lead to the revocation of the permit. Another incorrect approach is to rely on a subjective feeling of unease without a concrete, immediate threat. Arizona law requires a reasonable belief of imminent danger to justify the use or display of deadly force. Acting solely on a vague sense of discomfort, without an objective threat, is not legally defensible and can lead to unnecessary escalation and legal repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes a clear understanding of legal statutes, a commitment to de-escalation, and a rational assessment of immediate threats. This involves constant situational awareness, a calm demeanor, and a commitment to only using or displaying a firearm when there is an imminent and unavoidable threat to life or limb, in strict accordance with Arizona Revised Statutes. Question 16. Analysis of a scenario in Arizona where an individual observes another person in a public place who appears to be carrying a concealed weapon in a manner that suggests they may not have a valid permit. What is the most appropriate course of action for the observer to take, considering Arizona's concealed weapons laws and public safety. Option A. Ignore the situation entirely, assuming it is not a concern. Option B. Discreetly observe the situation to confirm the potential violation, and if safe and feasible, report the observed behavior to law enforcement. Option C. Immediately confront the individual and demand to see their concealed weapon permit. Option D. Call law enforcement and report a definitive violation without further observation. The correct answer is B. Discreetly observe the situation to confirm the potential violation, and if safe and feasible, report the observed behavior to law enforcement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to assess a situation involving a potential violation of Arizona's concealed carry laws while also considering the immediate safety implications. The challenge lies in balancing the legal obligation to report or address potential violations with the immediate need to de-escalate or ensure safety, without overstepping legal boundaries or making assumptions. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action that upholds both legal compliance and personal safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing immediate safety while also taking steps to address the potential legal infraction in a responsible manner. This approach involves discreetly observing the situation to confirm the potential violation without direct confrontation, and then, if the situation allows and it is safe to do so, reporting the observed behavior to the appropriate authorities, such as law enforcement. This is correct because Arizona Revised Statutes, A.R.S. Section 13-3112 outlines the requirements for carrying a concealed weapon and prohibits carrying a deadly weapon concealed without a permit or legal exception. While the law does not mandate immediate citizen intervention in all potential violations, it does encourage responsible citizenry. Reporting a suspected violation to law enforcement allows trained professionals to assess and act upon the situation according to established legal procedures, thus upholding the law without putting oneself or others in undue danger. This approach respects the legal framework while prioritizing safety and avoiding vigilantism. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately confronting the individual to demand to see their permit. This is professionally unacceptable because it could escalate a potentially dangerous situation, leading to physical harm. It also assumes guilt without proper investigation and bypasses the role of law enforcement in enforcing concealed carry laws. Arizona law does not grant private citizens the authority to detain or demand proof of a permit from others. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely, assuming it is not a concern. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to uphold the responsibility of a law-abiding citizen to report potential violations of statutes designed to ensure public safety. While direct intervention may be unsafe, complete inaction can allow a potential threat to public safety to continue unchecked. A further incorrect approach is to immediately call law enforcement and report a definitive violation without further observation. While reporting is important, making a definitive accusation without confirming the details of the situation could lead to an unnecessary or misdirected law enforcement response. The initial observation is crucial to provide accurate information to authorities. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, followed by accurate assessment and appropriate reporting. First, assess the immediate safety of yourself and others. If there is an imminent threat, take steps to ensure safety, which may involve moving away from the situation. Second, discreetly observe the situation to gather factual information about the potential violation. Avoid making assumptions. Third, if it is safe to do so and you have confirmed a potential violation, report your observations to the appropriate law enforcement agency. Provide clear, factual details. This framework ensures that legal obligations are met without compromising personal safety or engaging in vigilantism. Question 17. Consider a scenario where an individual who is 21 years old and has no prior felony convictions is visiting a public park in Arizona. They are not currently in possession of a concealed weapons permit, CWP. Based on Arizona law, what is the legally permissible course of action regarding carrying a concealed handgun in this public park? Option A. Carrying a concealed handgun is prohibited because a concealed weapons permit is mandatory for carrying any firearm in a public place in Arizona. Option B. Carrying a concealed handgun is permissible, but only if the individual openly displays the handgun to park authorities upon entry. Option C. Carrying a concealed handgun is prohibited because all public parks in Arizona are designated as sensitive places where firearms are banned regardless of permit status. Option D. Carrying a concealed handgun is permissible as the individual meets the age requirement, is legally permitted to possess a firearm, and a public park is not explicitly listed as a prohibited location under Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-3102. The correct answer is D. Carrying a concealed handgun is permissible as the individual meets the age requirement, is legally permitted to possess a firearm, and a public park is not explicitly listed as a prohibited location under Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-3102. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the intersection of personal rights, public safety, and legal obligations in Arizona. The core difficulty lies in understanding the nuances of Arizona law regarding the carrying of firearms, specifically when a concealed weapon permit (CWP) is not yet in hand, and the potential legal ramifications of carrying a firearm in a location where specific restrictions apply. Careful judgment is required to avoid violating state statutes, which could lead to criminal charges and jeopardize future CWP eligibility. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding and adhering strictly to Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS. Section 13-3102, which outlines the conditions under which a person may carry a concealed weapon. This statute permits carrying a concealed handgun without a permit if the person is 21 years of age or older, is not prohibited from possessing a firearm, and is in a location where carrying a handgun is not otherwise prohibited by law. Therefore, if the individual is 21 or older, legally permitted to possess a firearm, and the location, a public park, is not explicitly listed as a prohibited area under ARS Section 13-3102 p, such as schools, courthouses, or polling places, then carrying a concealed handgun is permissible. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and a thorough understanding of the specific exceptions and permissions granted by Arizona law. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that carrying a concealed weapon is always illegal without a permit. This overlooks the explicit provisions in ARS. Section 13-3102 that allow for permitless concealed carry under specific circumstances, such as being over 21 and in a location not otherwise prohibited. This assumption leads to unnecessary self-restriction and a misunderstanding of one's rights and responsibilities under Arizona law. Another incorrect approach is to carry a concealed weapon in a location that is explicitly prohibited by ARS Section 13-3102 p, regardless of whether a permit is held. For instance, carrying a concealed handgun into a school or a courthouse, even if one is over 21 and otherwise legally able to possess a firearm, is a violation of Arizona law and carries significant penalties. This approach demonstrates a failure to research and understand the specific location-based restrictions. A third incorrect approach is to carry a firearm openly in a public park without a permit. While Arizona law generally permits permitless concealed carry for those over 21 in permissible locations, open carry without a permit is subject to different regulations and can be perceived as threatening, potentially leading to unwanted law enforcement attention, or even charges depending on the circumstances and local ordinances, even if not explicitly prohibited by state statute for a park. This approach fails to distinguish between concealed and open carry regulations and their respective legal frameworks. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Arizona should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant statutes, particularly ARS. Section 13-3102. This involves identifying one's own eligibility for permitless carry, age, legal status, and meticulously researching the specific location's permissibility. When in doubt about a location's status, the safest and most legally sound decision is to refrain from carrying a concealed weapon until clarification is obtained or a permit is secured. This proactive approach prioritizes legal compliance and minimizes risk. Question 18. During the evaluation of a traffic stop scenario in Arizona, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant action for an individual lawfully carrying a concealed weapon with a valid Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit (CWP) when approached by a law enforcement officer? Option A. Remain silent about possessing the concealed firearm and CWP, hoping the officer does not discover it during the stop. Option B. Only reveal the concealed firearm when the officer discovers it, without mentioning the CWP. Option C. Assert the right to not disclose the presence of the firearm or CWP until explicitly asked for the permit, without any initial verbal notification. Option D. Immediately and clearly inform the law enforcement officer that you are in possession of a concealed firearm and that you hold a valid Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit. The correct answer is D. Immediately and clearly inform the law enforcement officer that you are in possession of a concealed firearm and that you hold a valid Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Arizona revised statutes, ARS, concerning concealed carry, particularly when interacting with law enforcement. Misinterpreting these statutes can lead to legal repercussions, even if the individual has no malicious intent. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the law while also protecting one's rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to immediately and clearly inform the law enforcement officer that you are in possession of a concealed firearm and that you hold a valid Arizona Concealed Weapons Permit (CWP). This approach is correct because ARS Section 13-3112G mandates that a person who is stopped by a law enforcement officer while carrying a concealed deadly weapon and who is in possession of a CWP must, upon request of the officer, display the permit and the deadly weapon. Proactive and transparent communication aligns with this statutory requirement and fosters a cooperative interaction, minimizing potential misunderstandings and de-escalating the situation. It demonstrates respect for the officer's role and adherence to legal protocols. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to remain silent about possessing the concealed firearm and CWP, hoping the officer does not discover it. This fails to comply with ARS Section 13-3112G, which requires disclosure upon request. This silence can be interpreted as an attempt to conceal illegal activity, even if the carry is legal, and can lead to suspicion and potential charges for failing to comply with the officer's lawful duties. Another incorrect approach is to only reveal the concealed firearm when the officer discovers it, without mentioning the CWP. While this might eventually lead to the firearm being identified, it bypasses the proactive disclosure required by statute and can create an impression of surprise or concealment, potentially escalating the officer's concern. It does not fully meet the spirit of cooperative interaction intended by the law. A further incorrect approach is to assert the right to not disclose the presence of the firearm or CWP until explicitly asked for the permit, without any initial verbal notification. While the statute specifies display upon request, the professional and legally sound practice is to provide immediate verbal notification. This avoids the potential for the officer to feel surprised or threatened by the sudden discovery of a weapon, which could negatively impact the interaction and potentially lead to a less favorable outcome. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach interactions with law enforcement while carrying a concealed weapon with a mindset of transparency and compliance. The decision-making process should prioritize understanding and adhering to specific state statutes, such as ARS Section 13-3112G. This involves recognizing that proactive communication is not only a legal requirement, but also a crucial element of responsible firearm ownership and de-escalation. Professionals should mentally rehearse the correct procedure for traffic stops or other law enforcement encounters to ensure they can act calmly and correctly under pressure. Question 19. Research into Arizona's concealed weapons laws reveals that while the state allows for permitless carry for eligible individuals, understanding the specific restrictions on where a firearm can be carried is paramount. Considering the legal framework established by the Arizona revised statutes, which of the following actions best reflects a responsible and legally compliant approach to carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. Option A. Assuming that permitless carry in Arizona means there are no restrictions on where a concealed firearm can be carried, as long as the individual is legally eligible to possess a firearm. Option B. Proactively familiarizing oneself with all locations explicitly prohibited by Arizona revised statutes for carrying a concealed weapon, regardless of permit status, and understanding the legal definition of concealed under state law. Option C. Relying on general advice from friends or online forums regarding the legality of carrying a concealed weapon in specific locations, without consulting the official Arizona revised statutes. Option D. Believing that possessing a concealed weapons permit, CWP, grants unrestricted authority to carry a firearm in all public and private spaces within Arizona. The correct answer is B. Proactively familiarizing oneself with all locations explicitly prohibited by Arizona revised statutes for carrying a concealed weapon, regardless of permit status, and understanding the legal definition of concealed under state law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Arizona. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Arizona revised statutes, Rs, concerning concealed carry, particularly the conditions under which a permit is required and the permissible locations for carrying a firearm. Misinterpreting these statutes can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the law, while also being prepared to act in a manner that protects oneself and others if necessary. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Arizona's concealed carry laws, specifically ARS Title 13, Chapter 31. This includes recognizing that, while Arizona is a permitless carry state for eligible individuals, a concealed weapons permit, CWP, offers certain advantages and may be required in specific circumstances or for reciprocity with other states. The correct approach emphasizes knowing the specific locations where carrying a concealed weapon is prohibited by law, regardless of permit status, and understanding the legal definition of concealed under Arizona law. This proactive approach ensures that the individual is not only legally compliant, but also aware of their rights and responsibilities, enabling them to make informed decisions in potentially dangerous situations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because Arizona is a permitless carry state, there are no restrictions on where a concealed weapon can be carried. This ignores ARS 13-3102, which outlines numerous prohibited locations, such as schools, courthouses, and polling places, and Rs 13-3102, A4, regarding carrying a deadly weapon on school grounds. Another incorrect approach is to believe that simply possessing a CWP automatically grants permission to carry a firearm in all locations, without regard to specific statutory prohibitions. This overlooks the fact that even permit holders are subject to the same location-based restrictions as permitless carriers. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or assumptions about carrying a concealed weapon, rather than consulting the official Arizona revised statutes. This can lead to a misunderstanding of legal requirements and potential violations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Arizona who choose to carry a concealed weapon should adopt a decision-making process rooted in legal compliance and situational awareness. This process begins with a commitment to thoroughly research and understand ARS Title 13, Chapter 31, focusing on both the rights and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm. This includes understanding the definition of concealed, the eligibility requirements for carrying, and the specific locations where carrying is prohibited by law. Before carrying a firearm, individuals should mentally review these prohibitions and assess their current location. In any situation where a firearm might be drawn or used, the primary consideration must always be the legal justification for doing so under Arizona law, prioritizing de-escalation and the avoidance of unnecessary force. Question 20. System analysis indicates a concealed weapon permit holder in Phoenix, Arizona, is standing at a location where they can see a public elementary school building approximately 900 feet away. The The school property also includes a fenced-in playground area that extends 150 feet from the school building. What is the correct calculation to determine if the permit holder is in violation of Arizona law regarding carrying a concealed weapon near a school? Option A. Estimate the distance visually to be approximately 900 feet. As this is close to 1,000 feet, assume it is safe to remain. Option B. Measure the distance to the nearest public road that borders the school property, which is 500 feet. Since this is less than 1,000 feet, it indicates a violation. Option C. Calculate the direct distance from the permit holder to the nearest edge of the school's playground, which is 750 feet, 900 feet, 150 feet. This distance is less than 1,000 feet, indicating a violation. Option D. Calculate the distance to the school building itself, which is 900 feet. Since this is less than 1,000 feet, it indicates a violation. The correct answer is C. Calculate the direct distance from the permit holder to the nearest edge of the school's playground, which is 750 feet, 900 feet, 150 feet. This distance is less than 1,000 feet, indicating a violation. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the interpretation and application of Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS, related to the permissible carrying of a concealed weapon, specifically concerning the calculation of distance from a school. The challenge lies in accurately applying the statutory distance requirement to a real-world situation, ensuring compliance with the law while understanding the nuances of measurement and the definition of school grounds. Misinterpretation can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a precise calculation of the statutory distance, adhering strictly to the definition of school grounds as defined by Arizona law. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and a thorough understanding of the relevant statutes. Specifically, ARS Section 13-3102. 12 prohibits carrying a deadly weapon or dangerous instrument within 1,000 feet of the grounds of a school. The correct approach would involve measuring the direct distance from the individual's location to the nearest point of the school grounds, not the building itself, and ensuring this distance is greater than 1,000 feet. This method directly addresses the statutory language and avoids assumptions or interpretations that could lead to a violation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that school grounds refers only to the immediate building footprint. This fails to account for the broader definition of school grounds, often encompassing playgrounds, athletic fields, and other adjacent areas, which would result in a violation if the individual is within 1,000 feet of these areas. Another incorrect approach is to rely on a visual estimation of the distance without performing a precise measurement. This is professionally unacceptable as it introduces significant subjectivity and increases the risk of unknowingly violating the 1,000-foot rule, which is a strict legal standard. A further incorrect approach is to consider the distance to the nearest public road as the determining factor, rather than the actual boundary of the school property. Arizona law specifies the distance from the grounds of a school, not from public thoroughfares adjacent to it. This misinterpretation would not satisfy the legal requirement. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the specific Arizona Revised Statute governing the location of concealed weapons relative to schools. ARS. Section 13-3102A12. Second, thoroughly understand the statutory definition of school grounds as it applies in Arizona. Third, utilize accurate measurement tools, e.g., GPS, measuring tape if feasible and safe, to determine the direct distance from the individual's current location to the nearest point of the school grounds. Fourth, if there is any ambiguity or the distance is close to the 1,000-foot limit, err on the side of caution and relocate to a demonstrably safe distance. Legal counsel should be consulted for clarification on complex or borderline situations.